everybody. I'm Marina. I'm the creator of Embossed. And I've created this space because I wanted to share my thoughts with you. I wanted a space to create webinars and podcasts and series. I also wanted to market my speaking engagements and my leadership coaching skills. My first task is going to be to interview a bunch of females in tech around Chicago, and I'll bring those stories to you. More specifically, I've been targeting the only 40 females that I found in Chicago that are Chief Technology Officers or CTOs out of over 700 plus male CTOs in Chicago. And I haven't even gotten into the POCs number yet. So please follow me, watch them, follow them, encourage other females to stay in tech and be in tech. I hope you enjoy. Thanks.
Welcome back to another episode of Embossed. This is your host, Marina Malagudi. Recently joined Instagram as a data engineering manager. I'm super excited today to have a special guest in Chicago, Betsy Ziegler, the CEO of 1871. She is an icon locally and hopefully in the Midwest. And if you don't know who she is, I'm super excited to get her to know you and for you to know her a little bit more today. So thank you for coming, Betsy.
Of course, my pleasure.
So Betsy, tell us a little bit about maybe who was Betsy as a little girl and how you grew up and how you got interested into your field specifically, which seems like, and then we can talk about it, is directed towards innovation and community development in general.
Yeah, I think if I think back to me as a kid, I was, and frankly remain infinitely curious, like getting excited about every new shiny thing to learn and to explore, and the jobs that I thought I would have as a kid ranged from archaeologist and geologist to business owner to lawyer to, I just bounced, which I think is kind of reflective of my career. I don't bounce frequently, but I have reinvented myself a couple of different times now in my post-education career, and I'm certainly happy to dive into that more.
Nice. What would you say to people perhaps that feel like because they have so many passions and interests, right, like you, they feel like maybe they're not focused enough or they're not like experts at anything? Do you feel that way sometimes or?
Well, I certainly feel like I'm not an expert in anything very frequently, but I also don't care about that. Mm. So I think that there's this sort of choice, this trade-off of, if you want to be an expert, then be an expert. If you want to be a generalist, then be a generalist. And there's lots of career paths that support you in either way. Does it serve you, depending on what you want to do, you might have to be an expert. You might have to devote your life to that. And then in your avocation or the time you spend outside of work, you can fill it with all these other things, which frankly, is what I do also. But I've always been a generalist. The world has never fully opened up to me and declared that I was meant to be X. Yeah. So I'm 49 years old. I've been working for 27 years. I don't yet know what I'm meant to be. So I'm just choosing to be who I am, right? Which is basically this collector of experiences, both in my professional life as well as in my personal life, where my metric is, am I always learning? Even if it's not like sitting down to say, I need to learn X, but I'm constantly absorbing information or meeting new people, which allows me to continually learn.
Nice. That is super interesting. And with the years, as you've experienced yourself this way, have you became a more purposeful learner by design, like where perhaps maybe in the beginning I can see how, even for me, because I'm similar that way, I was more like following every single passion, and now I'm like, okay, what are the next things that I should learn potentially to open up this door, this window, or to get some of this experience?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combo. I definitely think I'm a more purposeful leader. I think of myself as somebody that lives with intent, who owns her life and makes decisions that I think are the right for me and my family. By the way, I didn't figure that out completely until I was about 37, which we can dive into more detail on how that happened later. But I think that a lot of what, because I'm in tech and because I'm not in one area of technology, basically anything that's tech related is part of my job. So it's more purposeful perhaps now than it's been, because of like truly a pure blending of what I get paid to do and what I like to learn and where I like to spend my time. Right now it's smushed together. So it allows me to act potentially with more purpose around that.
Yeah.
And I'm only doing it for myself, meaning to pursue the things that I actually care about and the things that will help me be a better leader of the 1871 community, versus somebody telling me you should learn ABC.
Nice.
Right? Not purposeful in that direction.
Okay, fair. So what happened at 37? Because I'm sure since you mentioned it, my listeners are going to want to know.
Yeah, a little bit of a cliffhanger, I guess, if you question. So to the extent that my life has any cliffhanging moments. So when I was 37, I had been at McKinsey for
13 years.
I was 10 or 11 years into my career at McKinsey at that point, and the economic crisis was in full swing, and I was serving financial institutions who wanted to take a break from the firm, which we all understood. But that was the first moment in my life, I think, my professional life, where I had the opportunity to lift my head up and think about, okay, well, what is it? I've been serving insurance companies and banks for X number of years. What is it that I really want to do? Where is this an opportunity that I can explore? And so I filled my plate with all things social sector while I was still a partner at McKinsey. I did work for my undergrad alma mater, Ohio State. I did work in economic development. I did work in the performing arts. And that exposure, that idea that my skills were portable to solve different kinds of problems, really lit me up in a way that I wasn't expecting. And that, coupled with this interest in being more hands-on, more of the driver versus the driver's advisor, led me to do a couple of things. Eventually led me to leave McKinsey and go pursue other passions, which we can come to. But more importantly, probably very much in the short term, I was feeling like I was in this tight little box. That basically I can only talk about the crisis. I might say something about Ohio State because I'm a deeply passionate fan. I might say one other thing, but I was feeling I was living in this little box. So I wrote down on a piece of paper the 40 things I wanted to do by the time I was 40.
Wow.
And that took me about 20 minutes to write it down. Actually, I say on paper, I really did it in Excel, but that neither here nor there, I suppose, but sort of part of the story. And then I literally just started executing the things on the list, and they were my list. They had nothing to do with anybody else. They were certain places I wanted to travel, certain decisions I wanted to make, certain people I wanted to meet. And that really completely reoriented my perspective on my life, which led me to one of my life mottos of that you have to act with intent and you have to plan to live a full and happy life. Because if you don't, all the other things on our to-do list get in the way. And that's totally normal. And so I, that moment in spring of 2009, I guess, was the kind of
that's a huge defining moment. I love it. I also have a similar list. I think I have 135 items on my list right now. Not by the time I'm 40, but definitely within my lifetime, I'm hoping to complete. It doesn't. It's. I don't think is a indication of me wanting more things. It's just, I think, like getting deep into the details of describing exactly what it should look like. Have you ever revisited that list and seen if you actually accomplished all of those tasks?
Oh yeah, of course. I used it as the guidepost for several years now. I have my 50 by 50, and I turn 50 next summer, so I'm behind. I'll say that. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be the number 50 by the age. That's the list I wrote for myself, but it could be anything for anybody. They could design their own version of it. By the time I turned 40, so I gave myself my 40th year. So I gave myself to the eve of my 41st birthday to finish it. And I finished everything except one thing, which is that I didn't get something published. And when I turned 40, it just was a different time where it wasn't that long ago, but it also was that long ago when you think about where we are in terms of individual creation and publishing and getting your voice out into the world. By now, since then, I've been published many times, but at that point in time, that was the only thing on my list that I didn't get done. I had to have a replacement thing because I also had on my list to go to London to see Michael Jackson in his last concert, and unfortunately, he passed away before that was able to get done. So I had to have a sub in, but other than that, everything else on the list was.
I love that one. That's awesome. Have you used this type of purposeful leadership or life design? I think that's called in your organization now, CEO, and do you use that with your employees?
I do in a different way. I mean, I talk a lot about owning your life. And I talk a lot about no unmanaged outcomes, this idea that you are responsible. And every time I hire somebody, I talk about, and I also encourage it inside my own team, which I think was uncomfortable at first because culturally, it was a new concept for some people, this idea of understanding what the job after the job is. So for example, when people interview for a job at 1871, I always have, no matter what the role is, I always play some role. So I have some function in that hiring process. And I always ask, well, what do you think the job after this job is? And I think most people think that's a trick question. And I'm asking to see if they have a short-term view of their opportunity at 1871 or something else. But I tell them that it's absolutely not. And I give them examples of my own version of that, of thinking about when I left McKinsey and went to Northwestern. There was a big gap. I traveled for a bunch of months in between those 2 points in time. But I went to that job thinking that I wanted this other job, that eventually I wanted this other job, and that this job was the ladder into it. And I think it's really important that people have that lens, that because it's your response. You're the only person that owns your career path. You have to have some intention. Now, the thing I thought I wanted to be when I left and went to Northwestern, which was a business school dean, I learned after a couple of years that I actually didn't want that job. But that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. It has options in there. There's certainly the same thinking I did when I took the 1871 job. There's a whole bunch of different things that at some point in time, whenever that point in time is, that I will could pursue. And I just think that people, whether you're in your first job or whether your first job is as a program manager or as a customer success person or executive assistant or whatever, that is coaching that I give everybody on my team. And I started at the interview process.
That's awesome. I really like the intention behind it. Where did you learn this, by the way? Just to close.
I don't know. I don't know if I coined the term the job after the job, or if somebody taught me that term. I certainly was treated that way by the most important mentors in my career. And when I was at McKinsey, there was certainly an expectation that if other opportunities come your way, it was okay to talk about those. And so it was never hidden. And it was a discussion that people expected you to have with one another. And so that laid the foundation for me to treat, even though I went to very different institutions following that experience, to treat other people with that same sort of sense. And that, I think, is jarring in some cases if the previous, regardless of what the context is. It is not a very common thing for people to talk about potential other opportunities beyond the opportunity that you have currently in your organization, right? That's not a very common thing to have be open.
Yeah.
And my, it's not totally altruistic, let's be clear, right? Like I want my team members to feel comfortable talking to me about those things for a couple of reasons. The first is I can probably help them.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people and I'm older than them. My average age of my team is 31 or 32 or something like that. So I've already lived that part of my life. I can help them. And the second reason is because it gives me the opportunity to have some planning. So if person ABC on my team is interested in maybe 6 months from now, figuring out what their next career step is, that gives me a window to help them, and also for me to plan to pull somebody in enough time to have some transition period, et cetera. And it doesn't always work out that way, of course. But 1871 is a small organization. We're 32 people. We are not the organization that you come and spend your whole career at. We just can't. It's too small. There's not enough pathing. And so I've told everybody that I've hired that I expect them to come for a couple of years and then they'll get kicked out for positive reasons. You know, if they want lifetime employment, they can try for that. I don't personally believe in that. But
it's definitely an anomaly nowadays to stay at any employer for more than a couple of years. I would say 5. I've seen it. It's like veteran status.
Yeah, of course. And I was almost 13 years in at McKinsey. I was almost 8 years in at Northwestern. Right. I'm a generation or two ahead of probably, or maybe even 3 ahead of most of the listeners of this podcast. The world has changed in that regard in terms of the expectation that you'll have that many different shifts. Yes. That wasn't true for my when at least when we started working.
Fascinating topic. I think definitely there's a lot of pro and cons in that. I want to shift quickly to talk about your experience, since you just mentioned this. Like, what were some of the learnings, more impactful learnings let's start with McKinsey, perhaps. And 13 years in consulting business, you must have had exposure to a million different things. Maybe something that stayed with you from that time.
Oh, there's the vast majority of how I operate was defined by my experience at McKinsey, which I think is probably true for any professional service firm experience over that period of time. So, you know, as a consultant, your job is to help other people solve their problems. And so the skills that really get honed are around problem definition and influence, by the way, which I think are the 2 most important skills that people need right now, no matter what job you have. Defining the problem, being really clear about what it is you're doing. Are you solving is this really the problem, or is it some other thing? And that's a symptom of the actual problem. And how do you get things done through other people, particularly if you don't have positional power or authority? And I don't mean manipulation. I mean in a positive ways. How do you get people
to listen to
the right answer, right? And to self-discover that this is the path that they could have success with. So those 2 are the most important things I took away from my McKinsey experience, amongst many others. And I use both those every single day. I have been a practitioner of influence for, actually it predates it. It was when I worked at GE before graduate school. So I mean, for 30 years, I have been close to 30 years, been a practitioner of influence. I think that how I write, how I structure, how I lead meetings, all of that came from my McKinsey experience.
Nice, love that. And it certainly translates into 1871 and what it does for the startup world in Chicago. So I influencing the smaller companies and problem solving with them and giving them the chance to fix their own problems. I think that's definitely something that you translated very well at your current organization. Perhaps at Kellogg, I was just curious to talk about a little bit of like, what does a chief innovation officer do, first of all? And then maybe something about, going from consulting into academia or university, and how is that different? How was that different for you?
Yeah, so I'll say maybe a couple of things. First of all, this shift from consulting to academia, for-profit to nonprofit, academia to 1871, both nonprofits. The thing that ties it together for me, just to reinforce a point that I think is important, is that every day, for the vast majority of my professional career, I've woken up in service of somebody else being successful. Mm. So it was clients at McKinsey, it was students and faculty at Northwestern, and it's the entrepreneurs and the growth stage companies and the innovators at 1871. So I have found that is where I get the most joy, regardless of what problems they're working on, that I am better in situations where my job is to help other people get better.
Nice.
And I think that ties in a little bit to the theme of Unbossed, which we'll get to later. I am sure. I think so. What does a chief innovation officer do? Chief innovation officer, the dean at the time, and I made up the job, and we designed it from scratch. And it looks different in higher ed than it does in other institutions, I'm sure. But my job in that first wave was basically from a strategic perspective. What's happening in the graduate business education world, owning that point of view on behalf of the school and helping educate the leadership team around me of what I thought was coming, how to start to think about being prepared for it, how to start doing some experimentation. Of course, the faculty matter a lot. It was easy to lead innovation and do experimentation in collaboration with the students. That was super simple because they had a ton of great ideas, and all my job was to figure out how to create the opportunity for them to test them. With the faculty, it's quite different. They have, and I'm blessed by the fact that the Northwestern faculty was very supportive of me as a person, but also that the intention of that effort. And I think some of the stuff that we did laid the groundwork for how they responded during COVID. I certainly don't take credit for what they really did, which was, I think, phenomenal. But I think seeds were planted a couple of years ago and starting to shift that something might change in the world. We didn't know it was going to be a pandemic. Just on the last piece about shifting to academia, the things that I was worried about were the body rejecting the organ, because I was so different. I didn't go to Northwestern. Here I am coming in at a really senior level and not having any real background in higher ed, as well as the pace of change being too slow. And neither of those things happened. I think the first one, in part because I was trained from an influence, I knew how to go in and not try to take over the world, right? That wasn't my job.
Yeah.
And the second one was that Dean had a very aspirational agenda, which I was attracted to, so we moved really quickly. The thing that was hard for me was not being an expert on anything. And just contrasting that with the point we made earlier, that I'm a generalist and not an expert. I did have areas of concentration at McKinsey that I was known for. Things like the random, but things like call center and service operations. I was one of the experts at the firm at the time, on those topics. So I would talk to teams all over the world about it. And when I went to Northwestern, the faculty, of course, are the experts. So my phone stopped ringing for advice on those kinds of things, which was totally ended up being fine. It was a learning that I had that I didn't know how important that was to me in the transition. So it was a gap that I had to figure out how to fill.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that. There's perhaps hesitation in there too. And like, well, I feel it as I'm more of a generalist in tech, the hesitation of, oh my God, am I going to be able to dig deep into this technology with my senior developer and figure this problem out with them, versus, staying up here and making sure that they have a strategic vision to go after and goals and things like that. And going into the nonprofit into 1871, I want to take it to the current times, and obviously what you've seen is the current state of the world. Women are exiting the workforce at higher rates than ever. How is 1871 doing generally this year, and what have you noticed that are trends that are happening within the organization or within even Chicago?
So 1871 is doing quite well, to be honest. We've had to shift our business model a fair amount. When I say that, I don't pretend to say that it was easy. It's been a long 9.5 months or so for me and for everyone on the team, and I think for the community at large. So I heard a couple of things in there. I heard a theme around women leaving the workforce, but I also heard sort of the broad conversation about 1871 in Chicago, so I'll try to hit all of them quickly. We have about 30% of our founders are female, which is holding steady. It might have been 32% a year ago, where we bounced between 29 and 30, 31. Our goal is 35 our goal certainly would be at least half, but by July of 2022, we're hoping we get to about 35. So, and Chicago continues to do very well with respect to supporting female founders. We have a terrific program for early to mid-tenured female technical talent, a leadership accelerator program for them that has been phenomenal. We've about 60 women that have gone through that, all in Chicago. So I think we've got the right programs in place. We've got the right philosophy and foundation and structure to continue to support. Obviously, we've got a massive problem on the capital side of female founders, or any diverse founders. I just read this morning the article about the female funding in 2020 is significantly down over 2019. In 2019, I think we were 2% or 2.5% of all venture capital went to female founders, and you sort of say, well, 2% of some big number is less than like the Series E round for a major tech firm. So I wish I had the specific example. I can come back to it another time, but it's appalling, in my opinion. The dollars aren't being, the capital is there. It's just, in my opinion, not being directed to the right places. And so there's huge opportunity on that front, which many organizations are working on. This is not a new insight. Everybody knows this. Mm. We don't have a fund, and we don't control capital. We can influence at some level, but other people need to make those choices. And so we're trying to support on the side.
That makes sense. And as a mom yourself, how have you been doing? Like, I have 2 kids. I'm home with them most of the time. How have you been dealing with this craziness?
Yeah, it's. I think it's been, I want to say, it's like 284 days or so since my 7-year-old has been in his classroom. Of course, that includes the summer. That his last day in his classroom was the day I sent the team home from 1871 on March 13th. So we found our rhythm. Mm. I'm a single parent of a 7-year-old, so it is a lot of just he and I and the dog. So it hasn't been easy, but thankfully we're in a position where I can be home with him that not everybody else can do. We have access to Wi-Fi and technology that not everybody else has. We can take walks I live in Evanston, take walks every night with the dog without, there's not very many people. So there's like so many positive things. And his 2nd grade teacher this year has just been phenomenal, how she's led this class of virtual kids. In the spring, as you know, it was just chaos and nobody was prepared for anything. And so we sort of punted on the whole thing. But in 2nd grade, his teacher has been great. The school has been great. They're trying to figure it all out too. So yes, been difficult, working much harder than I've had in the past. But at the end of the day, my team is still intact. Everyone is healthy. My family remains healthy, and I'm quite grateful, I guess, for it all.
Nice, I love it. So have you noticed anything like related to perhaps indication of less participation of female founders at 1871 next year, or this year, next year? Have you, especially in tech, have you noticed any other trends at this point?
For female founders?
For female founders or women in tech in general?
I don't know if they're new trends. I think they're the same trends. Obviously, we've got to deal with the fact that a lot of people have left the workforce. And I think that there are a lot more women that could, the pipeline for female founders and the pipeline for female leaders in tech can be expanded. Again, not a new thought.
Yeah.
I think that when we go back to the theme around problem definition, what is the gap? What is the root cause? And one of our hypotheses, which has to be tested at least on the founder front, is that many women carry with them more responsibilities, or they at least have. So it could be caregiving up to their parents or to their aunts and uncles or siblings, and it certainly could be caregiving for their kids. And how do you, particularly in underestimated populations, how do you give them some peace of mind so that they can take time to go try out this idea? How do you give them a safety net? How do you support that piece of it so that they can kind of put that in the background and go pursue this idea of building a business? That's super hard. Mm-hmm. And it's extra hard in certain populations. And so that's a hypothesis. We're trying to raise money on that from grants to sub-grant out. So can we help you with your rent? Can we help you with your with daycare? Can we help you with your car payment, or get you broadband access, or get you a new laptop, or things like that? That if we can. We can't right now, right? We've applied for grants. We have not received any words back yet on this, but this to test into that idea, because if we can take some of that burden off, does it release enough space for people to explore tech as a career, as a founder? I think there's lots of other stuff that's going on right now to create more pipelines, whether it's through a university system or not, boot camps and other, to get people into tech, because there's obviously there's no evidence to suggest that they can't perform just as
good.
Well, I mean, it's been well proven.
Absolutely, I love that you guys are proactively trying to hypothesize on the problems and trying to apply for those things that may help those women become founders. Because definitely we don't lack ideas and incentives in order to become those founders. I think definitely there's something about resources that may click in the future. I think that's really good. We are almost coming up to running out of time. Want to tell us a little bit about, and tell my audience a little bit about how to get involved with 1871, what are some of the opportunities that you guys provide for the community in terms of like maybe volunteer or mentorship, and anything else that you see coming up for 1871 in 2021 that you may want to talk about?
Yeah, so there's a lot coming up. I think if you go to the website, you can sign up for our newsletter that goes out every week. You will see what events are coming up and what other opportunities are to engage. If you want to apply to be a mentor, you can reach out to my team at membership@1871.com. If you're interested in joining as a member, you can go to the same spot. We've got our Black Accelerator starting in first ever Black Founder Accelerator starting in February. If you are a aspiring Black founder and you're interested in learning more about that, please reach out. We also have our Latinx Accelerator that we participate in with the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, also launching again in February. I believe it's cohort 7. And we have a female founder program that will ramp up again in late May. So there's programs like that. But there's a ton of other things happening right now, and I would encourage you to use the website, the social media platforms, and the newsletter as your sources of information to keep up to date.
Awesome. A few more closing questions for you. You once told me you have 5 life mottos.
Yeah.
I would love to hear what they are, and then if the audience feels like they want you to come back to talk about them, I think that would be a great topic, but I would love to just hear what are those 5 life mottos.
All right, so I'll tell you the 5, and I am thinking about filming the short story among each of them separately that I'll post online. I haven't done it yet, but it has been filmed in the past by other places, but I'm thinking about doing it. Okay, so the first one is your life story is the summary of the choices that you make. Mm-hmm. And the best news about that is you can always make another choice. The second is people remember your response to the bounce versus the bounce. So when I was younger, and still actually today, when you make a mistake, sometimes it's out of perspective that you feel like it's life-ending, but people remember how you respond versus the mistake.
Nice.
The third is resist the urge to go underground, which means if you're feeling stressed or you're spinning or you don't know how to do something, the instinct is to put your head in the sand and to hide. And my encouragement is for people to ask for help. The fourth I've mentioned earlier, which is no unmanaged outcomes, which is thinking through all the things that could go wrong and getting out ahead of them. That's easier professionally than personally. And the fifth is to plan, to act with intent, act as an owner of your life, and plan to live a full, happy life. And they all have significant stories behind each one. There's more, there's probably more, but those are the 5 dominant ones.
I love it. Sounds like a great book to potentially.
Well, and so when you said, what book would you want to write? The title of the book is, And So I Did. And that's when I give leadership speeches, that's what I call the title of my speech.
I love it.
When I talk to audiences of usually younger people coming up through male or female.
Love it. Okay, so since you answered that question, what book have you gifted the most recently? Or
I was trying to remember, and they're one or of 2, but they're children's books, but I give them to adults. So I give the Places You'll Go, Dr. Seuss book, and I give the Giving Tree.
Nice.
Are probably the 2 that I give the most versus like adult books, because I think the messages are resonant no matter
the age, the time.
What.
Yeah, love it. And then, in your opinion, obviously my podcast is called Unbossed. I can tell you the story about it, but in your opinion, what does it mean to be unbossed?
Yeah, I had to give this some thought because, and you and I talked about this earlier, I think for me, it boils down to something I also said earlier, which is that I think my job is about helping other people be successful. So for me, Unbossed is setting the stage or creating the conditions for people to feel empowered and supported as they pursue and hopefully deliver impact on behalf of, certainly my team and my organization. But I think that's what I've settled on in my own head about what I think an boss means.
That is a great answer, actually. And, for everybody has a different opinion, but I love that answer. So thank you so much. So I think this concludes our interview. Thank you so much for coming and being with me. We have another 10 minutes that if you wouldn't mind hanging out, we can spend together. But otherwise, I loved having you on, and I love how integral you are to not only the community, the tech community in Chicago, and also I was really surprised to hear all these things about how intentional you are with your life. Pleasantly surprised in a good way, because I am also too, and so I'm super excited to hear more people do that as well.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. I'm going to stop the recording.
And my 7-year-old just showed up right after you said, you're not, you can say hi.